So this video is going to be all about giving your MIDI controller, be it a keyboard or a MIDI guitar or whatever, superpowers with using the Logic Pro scripter. The scripter in itself is pretty straightforward. It's a place where you can write your own scripts and create all kinds of MIDI functions. I've used it for merging MPE signals with something like a breath controller. I've used it to create an LFO, so when I'm using a MIDI controller other than MIDI Guitar 3 perhaps, I can sort of replicate some of the things that I could use a modulator in MIDI Guitar 3 to do, to perhaps have a sine wave in the background connected via CC1 to ModWheel directly into an instrument, feeding it with some sort of movement that I don't have to be involved with. So this video is not going to be about a particular solution for MIDI guitar. I'm going to introduce examples from Jamstik to Aeroband to Robo O'Reilly Guitar to MIDI Guitar 3. All of these can benefit from some functionality that I can get out of or create in the Logic Pro scripter. Like with the Jamstik, for instance, one of my critiques against Jamstik has been that you can't really use it as an MPE controller like it's sold to be. So I can easily write a script for the scripter in Logic Pro to endow the Jamstik with properties that it actually doesn't have. I can use it as a full-fledged MPE controller, having both pressure and CC74 at the same time, and also even lift, just using the traditional output, even in wireless mode. With something like the Aeroband guitar, for instance, it's even worse because it really doesn't have pitch bends even. So is it really worthwhile? Can it be used for something? Well, I wrote this script for the Aeroband guitar where I'm introducing MPE qualities to it, so I can actually modulate, I can affect CC74, pressure, pitch, and also lift, also for the Aeroband guitar. With the Robo O'Reilly guitar, for instance, I can use the finger pads as MPE controllers, controlling both pressure and CC74 with those already. You can see how the pink part is moving with the CC74 and the green part is moving with the pressure. But I can also assign stuff to the existing knobs and dials on the guitar. So I can change the chords I'm remapping on the fretboard, for instance, in real time with that. So there's a lot of really controller-specific stuff that I can do. As long as you have an idea about how to do it, it's really, really easy. But let's go back and start in the beginning. Why would you want to use a MIDI guitar to begin with? I'm going to say pitch bends, because they already allow us to do so much stuff that you're not able to do on a regular keyboard without a lot of effort. So if you want to record something like a virtual acoustic instrument, a trumpet or a sax or bass or something, you have access to all these little slurs and vibratos and stuff that really makes these instruments come alive already just by playing them. So the only thing I need to have out of any of these controllers is actually pitch bends, velocity, and note offs. And then I can do something like this. just a couple of things before I go into the scripts themselves. When I'm talking about endowing the Jamstik with MPE properties or adding functionalities to a controller, I'm not talking about going into the controller and adding functionalities into those. These functionalities are added in Logic's scripter, so it's very much at the end of the output from these controllers. And as you saw in the clip right now, I had a breath controller to control the expression in the flugelhorn that I was playing. So I'm going to assume that you have at least some sort of expression controller in your setup. And I'm also going to suggest that you think in pairs and use 2 at least, because I'm going to show you scripts going forward where I'm talking about modifiers. And for the sake of modifying MPE, the things that are new to control in MPE as compared to before is per note control over CC74, over pressure, and also over pitch. The least amount of controllers that I want to use is 2, because then I can use my breath controller to control pressure and my foot pedal to control CC74, and the string bands already control the pitches. But for stuff like the Aeroband guitar, I've also added the possibility of using some of the modifiers, that is one of the expression controllers, with a pair of targets, which could be pitch and CC74, pitch and pressure if you want to. For something like the Aeroband guitar, I developed this script into what I call the final boss script, or for you who don't agree with me, maybe the total snake oil, I don't know. You have a very much synthetic pressure curve that is generated from the incoming velocity. And you have the settings for that, so you can decide on how fast you want it to taper off if you want to. And also a choice between exponential and linear curve, stuff like this. When it comes to CC74, it's the exact same thing. Initially, pressure and CC74 are identical. You can differentiate between them by doing different settings right up here, but you can also go down here into the modifiers part, which is the more interesting part, I would say. The modifiers I use are, of course, the breath controller and an expression pedal. And you really need to know that when I'm talking about modifying the MPE signals, I'm not talking about fully replacing the pressure part of any MPE message sent to a synth with the breath control, because that would be a monolith, clumsy control over all the parameters out on all channels at all times. This is not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having breath control interact with the pressure part. So it kind of sneaks into the values already sent from the pressure curves, and it blends with those. So you have a takeover from your modifiers to, at some point, take over and run that particular note's pressure curve on that channel. And there are very specific ways in which I can control these notes and values as targets. If we look at modifier A here, I have chosen CC2, and that's my breath controller, and I have that in a relative mode. I can have that in a global mode, and that will work more like this monolith clumsy mode that I was talking about earlier. But then you have a next note mode, you have a highest mode, and you have a lowest mode. And these are all referring to particular ways in which they're interacting with the MIDI message. So if you have it in the highest mode, for instance, it will only target and affect the highest note in any chord you're playing, or in any set of notes that you're playing, actually. As an example, here I'm using the Aeroband guitar. I have my breath controller only controlling the highest note, and it's only with pressure. For the modifier B, which is my foot pedal, I've chosen for it to affect only the lowest note to begin with, but with all the targets. So I'm expecting a increase in ring size as well as a movement down in a motion like this, whereas the highest note will only increase in size. Let's see if that works. So if I want it to be pressure only or CC74 only or perhaps pitch only, I can have that. But I can also work with these kinds of pairs that I was talking about earlier. And these are specifically made for something like the Aeroband that has a very limited output. Limited here meaning not even having pitch bends. I can use pressure together with pitch in this case as a target. And I can, of course, use just one pedal to actually control everything, but that will also be very clumsy. It's a really powerful way of controlling these different parameters in real time. Not like you would with a keyboard, but in another way, and create completely new ways of working with MPE and guitars, which also sets it apart from stuff like MIDI Guitar 3. It's a way more precise way of designing exactly what you want to go into the control per note of the MPE output. Let's start with the script that changed it all for me. What feels like 100 years ago right now, I purchased this script called Scalerl from a guy called Code Cave. And I've featured this script many times in my videos. And that's a script that actually takes either chords or scales and remap them to the white keys. I take all the 12 notes or a subset of the 12 notes and I apply them with a certain logic to the keyboard. In the traditional case, you have the pitches laid out like this for the 12 notes. If I want this to be only played on the white keys, I don't have anything on the black keys anymore. So if I'm talking about C major shapes as we go along on the guitar, that will reference these white keys mapping. So here I'm still using these white key mappings, but I'm changing the scale to something else. Let's change the scale into a chord. Here you can get a more cascading idea because it's not necessarily so that a mapped note higher up on the piano must generate a higher note. That's I love the idea of remapping the notes onto a known controller of any kind because it takes away from the relationship where a certain chord shape always generates exactly the same sounding thing. You can still use chord shapes that you used to, but you will have to listen to the sound and actually react to that. And that makes for a completely new relationship to your instrument. You'll have to hear these new notes come out of the instrument in these places. So what Scalerl did for the piano was that you didn't need to think about scales in terms of white keys and black keys. You could only play the white keys and listen to what came out and create these new structures that worked for that. And of course that works on guitar as well. You only need to think about chords and shapes that works in C major, for instance. And you can start to build and map new scales onto that kind of mapping. Perhaps you only use notes from a diminished scale, for instance, but you map them to the places where the notes from the C major scale normally appear on the guitar, while playing the C major shapes and chords on the guitar. And I've also expanded on this. My addition to this is to remap them once again in the chromatic mode. So you don't have to think about the C major places. You can just play any notes fully chromatic and it will come out as whatever scale, chord scale or traditional scale you've mapped to this. So in essence, this is really a vast repository of scales like this, and it has these two ways of mapping these scales onto the fretboard. So you have the chromatic mapping and you have this white keys mapping right here. But we can't have everything in flux. We need something like a consistent reference point, something that never changes. And that's what the anchor point is. The anchor note or anchor point is where all these scales come together in the same place. It's the starting place for everything to evolve from. So from this list, I've chosen C3, which I think is a great place to start. It works fine for creating scales both upwards and downwards. But we're in Logic. Logic have something they call smart controls, and you saw me switch between different scales with this little dial on my guitar. This is how I do that. Down here we have the smart controls, and this is the button that I assigned to the scalar chord index, and that's the functionality that I can latch on to or assign to with an external controller, like my guitar in this case. So whenever I move the dial on my guitar, this happens. I will sort of switch between different scales. So I can click on another button here and assign to any other category. So I'll go for the scripter and I'll go for the mapping, let's say. Then I have the option of using another button on my guitar for, say, the chromatic or the white keys mapping. Now I'm mostly giving you examples with piano, but these remappings can be even more effective for instruments where you don't have any particular expectations on what notes are to follow from any previous notes. But the scripter can also be used for simple but really effective stuff, like their own stock note repeater, for instance. The main idea here is that the note is repeated in accordance to a certain logic. Maybe you set it to ascend in minor thirds, and you can decide on how many repetitions should be ascending before it starts over again. And combining this with something like my scale mapper, you can get the most powerful results. Maybe a change of scale or amount of repetitions or something like this. But at some point you'll find an idea that you find intriguing and want to pursue. And this is very much how I want to work with this stuff. So I'm probably going to go down this rabbit hole of creating a lot of scripts. I'll put them up on my Patreon. I'm making these because I have this genuine interest in different ways of controlling stuff, and I want to have these certain functionalities. And if you do too, fine. If there's a functionality you feel is missing and it is something that you think might be a perfect suit for something like the scripter, any idea might be a good idea. So don't be afraid of asking, at least. So let's go on to the other scripts here. Jamstik. Maybe you feel exactly like I do, that perhaps it left out on some of the things that you were promised when you bought it. It has no ability to send out those 2 of the 5 main components of MPE, that is channel pressure and CC74 at the same time. You could, if you have it connected via USB cable into your computer, you can access something that is a string envelope, and you can choose to apply that as one of these, but it wasn't any good at any time, and I've always felt that I haven't been able to use that. So if I'm just playing a chord right now, you can see that strike, slide, and glide seems to move. This would indicate to me that I've set the string envelope to send to CC74, because you see nothing on pressure, for instance. So let's see what the Jamstik software says. Go into device config here and On the string envelope expression tracking send, you see that I have CC74 sound control 5, it's called. So if I change this now to channel pressure, you are going to see something else happening up here in the MPE panels here. You're going to see some movement in pressure, but none in slide right now. It's too bad that I can't use these together because they're really meant to work together, the slide and the pressure in this case. So this will be one of my critiques against the use of the string envelope for either pressure or CC74 when it comes to the Jamstik Creator app. I really hope that they would consider actually expanding on this and consider and use two different kinds of string envelopes to facilitate both of these dimensions to be used together. So, well, that didn't happen. So I took it upon myself to make a script so I can use the Jamstik with its bare minimum. And that would be the wireless setup, only transmitting velocity, pitch, and pitch bends. Here I have the Jamstik connected via Bluetooth. And if I play this D2 right now, you'll see, okay, it comes up with pitch bend information. It comes up with the node information here and a velocity value for that. Now, I'm sending that into the scripter and the scripter does the rest. The scripter is actually adding a channel pressure dimension and a CC74 dimension. You can set the decay time for each of these for longer or shorter if you want to, and I'll show you everything about that. I've also added lift. That's a function that you can use in something like Equator to either add a sound on stopping a note or perhaps deciding on how fast the filter should close or a sound should stop once you stop that note from ringing. So you might want to check this out. This is the bow pizzicato position that is connected to the CC74, and this is the pressure. So both of these are added to the traditional input for this. So you can see how both of these are naturally decaying. In and of itself, that kind of decay isn't really that interesting or attractive, but it does remind us that we are playing a MIDI guitar controller. It reminds us that the strings have these decaying characteristic, and it's also applicable to any sort of stringed instruments going forward if we want to use it for that. I mean, here you have the script. That's the Jamstik MPE add-on. That's the working name right now. And as you can see, you have the pressure decay, you have the CC74 decay, you have a curve mode. I have 4 different curves, and there's a power curve to where a power factor plays in, but we're not going to go into that right now. These are the things that regulate how the velocity is turned into pressure in CC74. Down here at the virtual keyboard part of the Equator synth, you can see the notes being played. And you can see that it moves in a vertical mode to begin with. The vertical mode is CC74. So if you see the CC74 decay here, if I pull that down to 200, you'll see that it moves very rapidly down from the top instead. And conversely, very slowly with a higher number. The other thing that you can look for is the size of this ring. That determines the amount of pressure applied. So if I pull this down very much, you'll see very small rings. And if I raise it up, you'll see a bigger ring, and it will take a considerable amount of time for it to decrease in size. So the size of the ring is an indicator of the amount of pressure applied. But if you see the size of the ring move and this vertical motion, Then you'll know that the scripter is doing its job and adding these 2 dimensions over and above the lift that we have here, that is the last section. The lift isn't going to react until you stop the note, so it's going to be something like this. It's going to be depending on how much of the lift amount I apply, and it's also going to factor in other stuff like how long has this note been ringing for and stuff like it's internal to this script. Why am I so bothered with the MPE stuff? With a patch like this, you're going to have perhaps 2 different sound qualities connected to perhaps the top of this high up on the CC74 scale and lower down. So it's going to go between 2 different instruments, tones, or functions. For me to get the most out of any MPE instruments using what would be an MPE controller, of course I want to have access to some sort of movement here. I'm going to show you a way to control this in a while. This add-on just supplies these 2 dimensions to be controlled, in my case, by another script later on. But in this case, I just want to show you that it's possible to actually add these 2 dimensions in a way. So let's start with a long decay for pressure and a short decay for CC74. And if we do the opposite, you're obviously going to see a slow descent of the rings, but a faster decrease of the ring size. So obviously this is a work in progress, so the scripter has now evolved to this. Same day, of course, but I'm trying new things, and I really want this lift stuff to work because it's really important for the playability. But now to one of the big issues that guitar players generally complain about, and that would be the fact that they have no control over these parameters in real time. So it doesn't feel like playing a Rolley keyboard because you can apply the pressure over time and stuff like this. And the way I sort of tackled this was, first of all, I want to have this bass MPE add-on. After that, I have another script. It looks like this. And you can see that I have modifiers here. So I have a modifier A and a modifier B. And in this case, I've chosen CC1 for the modifier A, and that's a expression pedal that I have on the floor here. And that's connected to CC74. You see that I have modifier A target here, and that's the CC74 only. But I can use these for any of these dimensions or both if I want. If I just want to use one for affecting both dimensions at the same time, I can do that. So, but I want to be able to control CC74 and pressure separately if possible. Okay, so in this case, I have the pressure I'm controlling with a breath controller. And for a monophonic instrument like a swam cello, that's not too bad of an idea. And so for the general control over the CC74, I have this expression pedal. But what this particular script does is that it merges the MPE coming from the MPE add-on script. It merges that with the breath controller data. So I'm using the breath controller not necessarily just to raise the overall volume of everything, or that would be the global setting in this case. But I have something called a relative setting, and that would be for a polyphonic instrument. It will not even everything out and make everything move together like with the global setting here. And then, of course, I have only the next note that is going to be affected by this modifier. So when I'm breathing into the breath controller, I'm just controlling one note with the breath controller, and all the other notes are unaffected by this control. And when I'm letting go of that note and playing the next note, it's going to be that note that is controlled by the breath controller input in this case. And then I have the highest and the lowest, and that would be the highest or the lowest note in any chord that I'm playing that is going to be affected by the breath controller for pressure in this case. I have the exact same possibilities for the expression pedal and CC74. So a relative next, highest, lowest, and all these here as well. So I can use these to target two different notes with two different parameters. So I can use the breath controller to target the highest note with the breath control only. And at the same time, I can use the pedal to target the highest note with the CC74 control only. This will not show on this instrument, but I will be returning to this shortly. But this is how it works with a duo or biphonic instrument like the Swam cello here. I can obviously use the Jamstik as an MPE controller when it comes to Swam instruments, but the Swam instruments aren't the best at sort of displaying the possibilities. So we're going to go back to something like the equator again. Now you have all the details with the vertical positions and the sizes of the rings here to decide how well this works. And I'm going to add on this script again, so you can see in detail how stuff like applying these concepts only to the highest notes actually work and make a difference. So when we start out, here's the vanilla concept, and I have a pretty long release for a pretty long decay for both pressure and CC74, obviously. Now I'll add and turn on the script for the modifier here. It's not going to sound any different because I haven't touched the modifiers yet. I still have the expression pedal on the floor connected to CC74. That would be the vertical motion. And also the CC2, the breath controller, is connected to the pressure. And it's also set, and both of these are set to only attack the highest note. So you can look for whatever is moving here. It should be the same note that is actually expanding and being raised at the same time. The other ones are, of course, following the decaying from the envelope. So they're going to move down in this vertical motion, but they will be unaffected by anything I do with the breath controller and expression pedal. So if I just move both of these to lowest instead, I'll do nothing else. You can see that it's the lowest ringing note that actually takes over. So if some of these notes stop ringing, the next to the lowest note will start taking instructions from my breath controller and expression pedal here, of course. I just affect the highest note with my pedal, that would be the CC74, and I'll affect the lowest note with the breath controller with the pressure. Now, Jamstik isn't the only solution that would benefit greatly from a script like this. You could obviously use something like Fishman Triple Play and have exactly the same things applied to that. But also stuff like the Aeroband guitar. And this works for the Jamstik, Aeroband, or Fishman Triple Play, because the only thing you need to input into this script is a per note, or per channel in this case, pitch, velocity, and perhaps note off. But all of these controllers have exactly that, and some of them only that. I mean, the Aeroband doesn't even have pitch bends, but you don't need pitch bends for this to work. If you're content working with a controller without pitch bends, this is perfectly fine. You'll be able to control these pressure and CC74 dimensions. You don't need pitch bends. Of course, you want to have pitch bends. So, I mean, I can see someone using something like the Aeroband, because you do have infinite sustain, right? It would be exactly like pressing a key on a keyboard. It can sustain for however long you want it, and during this time you can use a modifier to manipulate the pressure and CC74, and it actually works better in that sense than a Jamstik, for instance, that has these notes with a rather short lifespan for different reasons. But then imagine something like the Rob O'Reilly guitar with something like the modifiers. I mean, you have a per note access to MPE categories like pressure and CC74 via the finger pads. And a lot of MPE capabilities also with the XY pad and stuff like that, but you can actually make some additional use of something like the modifier script here for stuff like working on the highest notes, the lowest notes, or any of the stuff that I can sort of equip this script with. It's not a problem to actually add stuff to a script like this. It's really easy. Now, I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in this class, but if I can do this, surely the guys at Jamstik would be able to. So for the last part of this very long video, I'm going to talk about how I'm using these scripts together with, say, something like MIDI Guitar 3 to get past this feeling of not having a per note control over the MPE output. So for anybody that has worked with Seaboard or an instrument or some of these MPE controllers, we have this direct control over these different dimensions, like pressure apart from CC74. It's not as obvious with Osmos, where the CC74 part is hidden somewhere in the key travel below the first initial pressure part. But this is all up to how the developers themselves want to have these dimensions connected to whatever gestures we have at hand for those controllers. And when it comes to MIDI Guitar 3, we have both the pressure and CC74 connected to our string pick envelope. So I understand if these two dimensions seem inseparable, since a picked note will generate both these curves, and on top of that, both of these curves are seemingly alike. Now, there are differences between the brightness that is extracted from the audio and the pressure curve that is extracted. So both of these curves exist, but they are somewhat different. But on top of that, there's a bunch of things that you can go in and do in MIDI Guitar to separate how these works. Connect the modulator to any synth that you want to have, and as an easy first example, just invert the positions of the minimum and the maximum handles in the pressure envelope. Connect that to an instrument, and instead of this energy tapering out, you'll get the exact opposite. You'll have a movement upwards in pressure as the string actually is dying out. And on top of this, you can connect the controller to any of the handles of the envelopes and change it in real time that way. So there are plenty of ways to go in and in detail shape and mold the different curves. The problem is perhaps, how do I tell the software I just want this note to be affected? That's exactly where my script comes in for me. You've already seen it in action with different setups, but this is the way it works with MIDI Guitar 3. I have a little script here. You can see that you can also see, of course, here that I have MIDI Guitar in its absolute most basic setup. So input gain, I'm not using the hex version. So this is the vanilla version of MIDI Guitar 3. Input gain at 0 and gate at 14. I've pulled back on pressure because that's the only thing I need to do from its normal behavior with this particular script. Now, what this script does is that it merges any sort of incoming controller, like a breath controller or an expression pedal, with the output MPE that goes on a per note basis on all of these channels. We can look at what happens with pressure and with CC74 if we just output it. I'll turn this off and we'll just output it as is. You're going to see the notes drop down here in a vertical manner, and you're also going to see ring sizes decreasing. So it's going to be the blue part, the inner part of the rings that are decreasing in size. So I don't know how obvious that is to you, but it really doesn't matter right now. The thing is that the string envelope is connected to the CC74 in this way. So as the energy from the string is decreasing, you'll have this falling down. You can, of course, invert that or use the modifiers to control that, and you can connect something to the modifiers, as I've shown before as well. But this script overrides anything in even a more direct manner. So when I turn this script on, I have it set to CC1 here and CC2 here. So I can actually use two different modifiers, but I'll start with CC1 here for both targets. So I can use it for either CC74 or pressure. But I have an expression pedal down here. So when I'm using that, I'm changing both CC74 and the pressure at the same time. I can use what I have here as a relative mode, and that would be a scaled increase of whatever is output already. So if there's a difference in CC74 and pressure already here, it will take notice of that and sort of just make a higher output, but with the same relative differences intact. If I use something like the highest note, I will only affect the highest note of all the played notes. But you see a takeover there. As soon as the highest notes stop ringing, it's of course time for a new one, and that would be the highest new note, of course. So but it's good for stuff like playing one note and having some other notes run beneath it and not be affected by what you're doing with the expression pedal, like this. And I can also go to controlling just the lowest part of any chord with this. You see that everything moves, it sort of cascades underneath, and that's because they're still taking instructions from the envelopes that are sent from MIDI Guitar here. So I have CC74 still sending, which means that they are going to be moving in this vertical motion in accordance to the envelope that is sent from here. So if I want to skip that completely, I just not use the CC74 from the MIDI Guitar. I can even skip using pressure, actually. So in this case, I only use my pedal to change the pressure or CC74. So for this example, I want to use two modifiers. So I'm using the breath controller to control pressure only, and I'm controlling the lowest note only. So my breathing into this will only affect the lowest note that I'm playing. And I'm using the expression pedal to control the highest note with CC74. So that is going to be the vertical motion. Don't forget the release part, it also affects the sound. Now I can go for using my breath controller to control both parameters simultaneously. And I can use the relative mode. This is the most expressive mode, I think, because you have this feeling of control over both of these parameters at the same time and just with one controller. Let me use the expression pedal instead. It's sort of, I think most are more comfortable with an expression pedal. So you see, it's not a problem to actually move between these sources of modifiers either. So I can use both a breath controller and an expression pedal at the same time, and connect one to pressure and one to CC74. I can connect one to pressure and have the other one controlling both CC74 and pressure. That would be a merge of anything that goes into this. So that would actually end up being a merger between what comes in from MIDI Guitar 3 together with these two ways of trying to control pressure as well. Using three different sources like that might not be the best thing for accountability or total control, but at least it's possible, and you'll get pretty damn good results with this script. So at least I can say that I've introduced an idea of how to real-time control this, even if it's up to a better coder to do this for a software or something. But I've done this in Logic for the Logic scripter, and I'm pretty happy with it. So token of my appreciation for you staying this long, I'll give you two more tips before I go. And the first one is for all of you who think that, okay, but I don't want to work in Logic. Well, you don't have to actually. You can just set it up as template with an external instrument and a script loaded on one track and have it in the background. Logic will create a virtual MIDI out, and you can pick it up in Gig Performer or in Ableton. Just have it run in the background. The other thing, if I have any old MIDI controller that's just sending out on one channel at a time with something like the Final Boss, I can do pretty much with pretty little to begin with. So this has to be it for now. I'll be over at Patreon doing my thing. You're welcome to join me there if you want to. Even if you're not interested in any of these particular scripts, there might be something that you're interested in but don't know if you can do. You can ask me. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I don't know right now, but hope to see you there. Bye for now.